Hello friends, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you're enjoying our little weekly show, and if you're just discovering it, a very big welcome to you. I always try to feature the artists you've requested, and this week is no exception. YouTube's Darren-Q5N reached out saying he'd like to hear more interviews with soul, funk and R&B artists from the 70s and 80s. So here's one for you, Darren. It's singer, dancer and actress Shelly Clark, who's been in Ikette with Ike Tina Turner, performed with Little Richard, but is perhaps best known as a founding member of the 70s R&B girls group Honeycomb. Shelly was born in Brooklyn to a concert pianist Russian Jewish mother and a father from Barbados. She began her career at age 6, and at 7, she and her brother, who became known as the Clark Kids, were cast in a hit Broadway musical. Today, Shelly is married to Earth, Wind and Fire founding member Verdine White, and she's just released her first single in almost 50 years. Her journey hasn't always been easy, but I'll let her fill you in.
My mother had one of the only pianos back in the 40s. I would sit there on the floor babbling and making up my own lyrics and melodies. And she was like, wait, what? And she called my father in and she said, listen to this. He said, she's got perfect pitch. I think we should do something with her. So I started going into little kitty pageants and just winning everything. The things took off. You know, they put my brother with me and here we start dancing. We're getting every audition in New York. When we walk in, oh God, the Clark kids are here. Let's go. You know, we started playing places like no kids would ever play. The Apollo Theater. We were the youngest act to ever perform there. And then we did the Palace, and then we got on Broadway, and then we were signed to Columbia Records, and we did an album.
Was your dad also musical?
Actually, no. He was just one of those very talented, self-taught kind of guys. He could sing, he could whistle. You know who's a whistler is Cynthia Erivo. She can whistle a whole opera, a whole song.
Really?
It's just a talent not everyone has. As we got more famous and got more work, they put us in private school along with kids like the Hines kids. And you remember a movie called The Bad Seed with Patty McCormick? They were all working kids. You could go to school or not go to school. They were not even checking.
That first musical you did on Broadway was with Diane Carroll, and then your parents picked you up and moved you to Los Angeles in 1957. Why the move to LA?
My father figured we were doing so well in New York that why don't we go to Hollywood and I could get you kids to break you kids into the movies. And, you know, forgetting still that, you know, we're a Black family. It was a little harder. It just became a whole different beast. First of all, we had a little cutesy era in New York. By the time we got out here, we were getting into our younger adult type 13, 14. And as you know, it's sometimes hard for kids to transition. Yeah. Look at these Mickey Mouse Club kids. They used to call me the Black Shirley Temple in New York. But even Shirley Temple had a hard time transitioning to adult film. And we just weren't getting hired out here. So my father threw his hands up and he said, the doors are slamming left, right, and center. Do you kids want to do it? And so we said, yes, we do, but we'll just sing. And so that's what we started doing.
Shelly, though, when you say you were a Black family, having told me that your mother was a Russian Jew, you were actually biracial, weren't you?
Yes, yes.
And what was that like for you in the day?
Well, when I was young and I might be with her on a subway or going somewhere, the stares that we would get would be like people were either horrified or, you know, oh, what cute kids. It's no dark secret. When I toured with Cab Calloway at the age of 9, I did a 7-month tour with him. When we hit those southern states, Sandy, I wasn't allowed near her and she could not stay with me in the Black hotels. So they had to put her across town in the white hotels because if we had been seen together, we would have both been arrested because that's how bad it was. You know, America has some very ugly parts of history. It was Jim Crow. It was terrible. Now, they loved to see us perform, but I was not allowed to be with her. So the chorus girls became my bonus mothers during that period when we were down south, and they snuck me to see her in the trunk of a car.
Wow.
And that's the only way I could go visit her.
That must have been so difficult for you. Those were the times where white and black audiences had to be segregated, not only in the concert, but as you say, in hotels, restaurants, everywhere.
Everywhere. I think Sammy Davis helped break that up a little bit because he had his Rat Pack fighting for him, but still, he wasn't allowed to come through the front door. He wasn't allowed to use the swimming pool. And I believe that Frank Sinatra and that whole Rat Pack, they helped the hotels, they made them accept him. So after a while, he was sort of like a trailblazer, but that was in Las Vegas.
Right. That wouldn't have been easy for you at all.
Right.
And down
Right.
south was somewhere where you had to tour and travel with Cab Calloway and do all the shows.
And also, when I got with Tina Turner later, we did a Southern tour. But Ike Turner was smart enough to hire a white female road manager. That's how innovative he was. You know, was he crazy and power hungry? All of that. But he was also a genius in that he knew we're going to hit this Jim Crow South. I need some help. So Rhonda Graham was our road manager, and she made it very smooth with the white promoters down there.
How did you meet Ike?
It's very funny you should mention that because a very beautiful woman who worked for Ike and Tina somehow found me and came to my house and auditioned me. And she said, "Oh, I love you. You'll be fine. I'm going to send you out on the road." And I said, "Okay, when do I leave?" And she said, "Tomorrow." I said, "Oh, wait a minute, what?" And her name was Ann Kane. She was married to Otis Williams of the Temptations. I went out there and it was crazy from the time I landed because I was approached by Ike. You know, it was his thing to make sure every Ikette belonged to him, as well as Tina, as well as Rhonda Graham, the road manager, as well as any female that worked for him. He had to have control of you. So I almost turned around and I almost wasn't an Ikette because I unpacked my bags. And then when I saw him and he was making demands, I started packing my bags again. So I was almost out of there. But then he came to his senses and he left me alone.
We're talking about sexual harassment. We're not talking about sexual abuse.
Well, it has a name now. It didn't back then, did it?
No, it didn't. And
Right?
it wasn't punishable. It was their right.
No,
Yeah.
right, right.
But what do you mean when
So
you said that she came to your house to audition you? How did that come about?
Honeycomb was performing at a club here called Catalina Jazz Club. And so, not that night, but another night when we actually went to that same club to see our friends, the Supremes, they told me that Ann Kane might be there. And I said, "That can't be. She's got to be, what, 80 something by now." Well, don't you know that after the Supremes finished, someone yelled my name and said, "Shelly, is that you?" I turned around and it was Ann Kane. And so I asked her what you just asked me. And I said, "Ann, how did you know about me
Yeah.
back then?" And she said, "Look, Shelly, it was my job to know every musician and every singer. I made it my job. I had a Rolodex this big of names of musicians, guitarists, drummers, singers, dancers, horn players, keyboardists." And she said, "Your name came up and I found you." That was 1965, 66.
You were just a teenager when she spotted you and sent you out the next day with the Ike Tina Turner Revue.
19. I was so pissed when Ike was in my room looking for sexual favors. I wanted to curse her out because I said, "She didn't tell me about this part." You know, she was smart. She knew not to.
Wow.
And she knew what happened out there. But as it turned out, like I said, it worked out okay.
Did you call your mother and tell her what was happening?
No, no, because back then I'd figure it's one of those things that happen. And if he had maybe gone further and raped me or something to that, I probably would have called, but it didn't go anywhere. So I just said, "Hey, I guess I'm going to be an Ikette for a while." And I was until the bus driver fell asleep and I got thrown out the bus and I broke every bone and I was hospitalized down there in Wichita, Kansas, in the snow, buried in the snow.
You were seriously injured, weren't you?
Very, very much. I was on crutches. The review had to go on without me. they put their tour back together, they probably called Ann and said, hey, we need an Ikette. We got one down. We got one down. So I'm sure she got in her Rolodex and found somebody and sent them out the next day.
You must have fallen into a severe depression at that time. You'd have to think that your whole career's come to an end after having this wonderful opportunity just end so suddenly.
I'd like to be depressed back then, but I couldn't. I had bills. So I had to hurry up and heal and get well so I could get my ass back to work. And as it turned out, I was approached not too long after that, maybe a month or two after, when I was healing, by Little Richard. And he was putting together his review and needed some dancers. And so I said, hey, I'm going to heal. I'm fine. I want this job. So I didn't have time to be depressed.
Just before you move on to Little Richard, because that's a whole other story, just tell me what it was like to be an Ikette. And apart from Ike's sexual advances that you managed to stymie, what was it like to be in the show with Tina?
I have to say, she's the most electrifying person on and off stage that I've ever met. This woman was just so dynamic. I mean, she could take an audience and turn them upside down. And she was so sexual without being sexual, you know. She could sing her ass off, and she like had everything covered. I felt so honored to learn from her, although she saw that I was pretty fiery too. So she had me dancing and singing next to her all the time. She taught me dynamic stage presence because, it was no dark secret that I would beat her up sometimes, and sometimes backstage she'd be patching, makeup all over her face and here and there, and go on stage like nothing ever happened.
She was his
and
possession.
Flirt with him and do her thing. And I said, this is some alien off the chart stuff that I've never seen before.
Would have been very worrisome as a young girl to see all of that sort of stuff going on in front of you. You were part of the touring show. You didn't actually record with them, did you?
Never. I toured, I rehearsed at their home because they lived here in LA also. So I got a chance to see a little bit of their home life, which was fairly normal until I decided to explode about something. It didn't have to be much because he was bipolar. You never saw it coming. I had the best teacher. I had Al McKay, who was the lead guitarist for Earth, Wind, and Fire later on in years. But he was Ike's lead guitarist. And he said, listen, you don't hear anything. You don't see anything. You don't know anything. There's going to be a lot of things that you want to ask questions about. Don't ask any questions. Just do your job. Go back to your room. Don't ask anything. Wow. Don't make friends.
Really?
And you will last a long time in this review. He said, it's very crazy. And you will see Ike all over the place. In other words, I guess what he meant was you'll see him, creeping to different rooms and because it wasn't just Tina that he would, get physical with. He would beat up everybody who he was seeing.
Wow.
So
how many Ikettes were there?
In total, about 70 or 80. On stage, there were usually 3 and or 4 because there was always one Ikette that was Ike's main girl that didn't sing. She couldn't sing, but she was gorgeous and she was beautiful. She was very young. So they let her be an Ikette, but the harmony parts were missing. So they had to add 3 more real singers. So she would just sort of lip sync. Right. But she was adorable and she deserves better.
So there was a troupe of about 60 or 70, you said, but obviously they didn't tour with that many at one time. There was just a pool that he could pick and choose from.
Always. It was a revolving door. One Ikette out, another one in.
What was the lifespan of an Ikette? How long did they last?
Oh, I have to say, if Tina liked you, if you could manage to skirt Ike and everything was fine, you could stay there for years and years. There was one Ikette named Edna. I want to say she was there for 8 years, but that was later on. I guess a year or two tops for normal Ikettes.
And how long were you into it before the bus accident?
Honestly, I didn't make it more than 6 months. Wow. Before the bus turned over in Wichita, Kansas.
You poor thing. Okay, so now we're talking Little Richard. What, he comes knocking on your door, or he sends somebody to say, hey, I like this. How did that come?
He had a manager, very aggressive manager called Bumps Blackwell. And somehow or another it was the same thing. They were looking for dancers, and he said, but I need a male dancer with you. And it just so happened that I was very good friends with Byron Gilliam, who was on Laugh-In. Do you remember that show with Goldie
Yeah,
Hawn?
sure.
Yes. He was that tall, elegant male dancer that was dancing in all the segments. And he also danced for Hugh Hefner in Playboy After Dark. And so I reached out to him. He was a gorgeous dancer, just gorgeous.
So you started touring with Little Richard. What was that like?
He missed his calling as a stand-up comedian. Little Richard is so funny and just so entertaining and just really wonderful, and backstage it's just back to back jokes, but real jokes, like have you on the floor kind of stuff.
Wow.
So I enjoyed my time with him. I think I toured with him less than 6 months.
Right. But you were safe. There were no problems on the road with him.
Right. That was fine.
Yeah.
Except I was always afraid of the tour bus. I couldn't sleep.
You were dancing with Little Richard. Were you also back up singing?
I begged him. I said, Richard, please let me sing. Let me sing this week. Please, please, Richard. Every day I wore his shoes off, just begging. And he couldn't say my name. Okay, she was, his boy from the South. Okay, Shirley. Let me think about it, Shirley. Let me drag it out. Listen, Shirley, maybe next week. And I would say, well, are you sure? Maybe next week? Maybe, Shirley. Let me think about it again. And so he never let me sing. long story short.
Right.
But he was still fun.
Yeah. What was your favourite song of his to dance to?
As I remember, it had to be one of the hits because the wilder he got, the wilder we liked it. Lucille and Tutti Frutti and all of that stuff. And we opened the show for him, kind of warm the audience up. And then we come back sometimes and dance while he was singing, but he didn't want to be upstaged. So he didn't have us come out too often while he was singing, but sometimes.
Amazing.
So I liked all his songs. He put the Beatles on the map.
How did he do that?
We went back there and helped them with their music. They idolized him. I'll tell you who idolized Ike Turner. And see if you can put this in your head. Prince. Prince idolized Ike Turner. And so you could almost see, because Ike was a fly dresser. He could play the hell out of guitar. He sang somewhat. And when he would let it go, he was a good performer. He was always nervous that Tina would upstage him. But he really was a good performer because that's how she found him. He was performing.
He did make her career, but I guess she was pretty sorry about that in the end.
Yes. After a while, she was like, you know what? I think I can do this without you. And she certainly did.
Shelly Clark White, it comes around to 1968 and you set up a band called Honeycomb. It's an American R&B soul group that originally formed in conjunction with Edna Wright, who was Darlene Love's sister, and another lady called Carolyn Willis.
Mm-hmm. It was actually formed by the lead singer Edna Wright, who was approached by Holland-Dozier-Holland, and she told them, I don't want to be with you as a solo artist, but I'll be in a group. It just so happened that Darlene tossed Edna some work. Edna needed 2 more girls. It was the Andy Williams TV special. So I was already singing with Carolyn. We were in a group called Willis, Matthews, and Clark before we were Honeycomb. So Edna says, listen, Shelly, I have somebody watching us. And if he likes us, let's go back to Detroit and sign and be a group. So we do the show with Andy. Sure enough, Edward Holland calls Edna and he goes, I like the look. You guys come back to Detroit. They were forming their own label. And I said, nope. So I started traveling and I moved to London. They didn't have a word for it, but now they call it stalking. So they stalked me until, damn it, I'll take one meeting. And then it was my intention to make it so hard for them, for Holland-Dozier, that they wouldn't want to deal with me. Well, do you know they did everything I asked for?
If somebody listening hasn't heard of Holland-Dozier-Holland, let's just explain, because they were a really big deal, weren't they? They were Motown's primary songwriters at the time, and they left to start their own label.
Yes. They had a dispute with Berry Gordy about the royalties and what they were getting paid. They were legendary. They were doing Martha Reeves, they were doing Smokey, they have the Temptations, they had the Four Tops, Sugar Pie, Honey Bun, all of that stuff. They say that this was the longest running court battle, music industry battle in history.
Really?
The longest running. But they were not allowed to use their own names. If you look at some of the Honeycomb albums, you'll never see written by Holland-Dozier-Holland. We had three main songwriters, and they were Greg Perry, General Johnson, chairman of the board, and we had Angelo Bond, great lyricist. So we had Holland-Dozier-Holland, and we had a dream team of younger kids writing music for us, and it was just magical.
Amazing. You were the first act that appeared on their new label that was called Hot Wax Records, and
yes,
you blew up. Tell me the story of how you got the name Honeycomb.
Now therein lies a whole nother story. And we're sitting in front of Edward Holland, and he's signing us, and he says, yeah, well, I think I'm going to call y'all girls Honeycomb. We looked at each other and said, okay, so what's a honeycomb? And he said, don't worry about it. Sign the contract. And so it wasn't until years later that we found out that as children, he and Brian had a favorite dessert, and it was an ice cream. And it was a flavor called honeycomb, but he never would tell us. But speaking of first artists, we were the first artist signed to them, and also the first artist to perform on Soul Train. What about that? We had on silver space suits at the Apollo.
That was a whole different look than what was going on in the day too, wasn't it?
Yeah, because don't forget, we're coming out of the 60s, and we're going into the radical 70s. 71, One Ads hits and knocks the Rolling Stones off the #1 spot.
That sold over 1 million copies and really set you on the way, didn't it?
Right. I think the women of the world were tired of Stop in the Name of Love and Before You Break My Heart. And we were known for coming into an era with lyrics of empowerment for women. And so once they heard One Ads, I'm going to get rid of you and put it in the One Ads, and the next one was Stick Up, Highway Robbery. Another one, was the day I lost you, was the day I found myself. One Monkey, Don't Stop, No Show. And that was another hit.
You're out on the road, you've got a successful string of hits. Why are you still broke?
Because we're still in the 70s. And in that time, you made money, and then they said, hi, you remember that hotel bill you had over there? Remember all that, the studio time? You got your royalties and the list of stuff here, and then you got the breakdown of your indebtedness.
It's such a common story for that era, isn't it? So many people, many artists were ripped off.
When One Ads hit, I was on a television show with Jim Neighbors, a weekly show, Goma Pyle. And they gave him a variety show. It was wonderful. I was like, the only black on there. I was a star. And so they said, Eddie Holland said, well, now you got to get off the show. So I'm stuck in the middle of being sued by two different entities. It was just sort of doomed. So, it fell apart. It fell apart in 1973 for Honeycomb.
So what did you do then?
So after, Carolyn Willis, first of all, she went on to tour and write music for Seals and Croft.
She was actually a featured vocalist on their song Get Closer in 76, wasn't she?
Right.
And then she toured with people like Neil Diamond, Boz Scaggs, Carly Simon.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Melissa Manchester. Right. She was all over the place.
What we've left out of this entire conversation so far, and I'm coming back to Honeycomb in present day, is the fact that you met Verdine and you got married, and you have been married unbelievably in this business for so many years. So tell us about your marriage.
Well, it so happened that one of the members of Earth, Wind & Fire approached me. I didn't know any of them. And he said, I'm a songwriter, I'm with Earth, Wind & Fire, but I tour a lot, but I do have these songs that I'd like to cut on a female singer. Would you be up for singing them? And I said, sure. And so I went into the studio, and I was wondering who the band would be, and it was Earth, Wind & Fire. It was the Maurice White, it was Philip Bailey, it was Larry Dunn, it was the original 9, and way in the back, I see Verdine White. I almost passed out because I said, he's not on my session, he's the best bass player in the world. Anyway, nothing really happened with the music. We didn't really bond that night, but I saw him 6 months later in a car wash, and I said, hey, I know you played on my session. And he said, whatever happened to that music? It was great. And I said, well, I have a cassette. Sit in my car and I'll play it for you. So I played him the music. He said, let me do some music on you. That's a shame that that stuff just is in limbo. So that's how that happened. So he started working with me and we worked platonically for a year because he was coming out of another relationship and it was crazy. So we stayed just, friends, but musical friends. And then after a year, that was resolved. And so we got together and we didn't marry, I think, until 1980, but we did that TV show, Hot City Disco. He was the music producer, and I was the star called Fire.
You've managed to stay married for 45 years. What's your secret? In such an industry, there must be a secret.
It's crazy, right? Verdine always goes, you realize that that's really 400 years in Hollywood, right? I go, yep. People ask us, don't you guys ever fight? And my line is, we fight every day, usually over the mirror.
And who wins?
We take turns.
You've
Well,
kowtowed to his career a little bit and let him be
yes,
the superstar in
exactly.
the partnership.
Exactly, exactly. I have to say that it was founded on music and friendship and a love for each other, not sexual
Yeah,
love, but
yeah,
just
yeah,
a love and an admiration for each other.
yeah.
I asked him, I said, "Well, what do you like about me?" And he said, you make me laugh. And he said, and I like the sound of your shoes on the pavement when you walk. It's always the key of, and I think he said C. And I said, oh, wow, that's deep. You would never think that someone is that focused or that aware and that would mean something, right? And I'm like, damn, this boy's got it bad. I was so impressed with his manners and that he was like a real gentleman. And I said, boy, he's got evidently great home training, always open the door, always let you walk in first. He was into classical music. He didn't want to listen to a bunch of, R&B and rap all the time. Even to this day, he listens to classical music, goes to sleep by classical music. That works with me. It helps settle us and keep us grounded. If you have a friendship with someone first, you are miles ahead.
I love that. So 2014, you decide to reunite Honeycomb. Carolyn doesn't want to be a part of it, but you find yourself two other great ladies.
And Edna was already touring with another bunch of honeycombs. I told Verdine, I said, I would love to put it back. And he said, well, my drummer is married to a singer. She tours with the Sounds of the Supremes. So I gave a dinner party for him and I invited John and Kathy. And I sat next to her. I said, hey, Kathy, what would you think about helping me resurrect and do a reimagined honeycomb? And she said, oh, that sounds interesting. I said, can you find a third girl? And she said, absolutely. And we all met. We had a chemistry. So it just worked after that. And, we have a mutual respect for each other. And we talk about wardrobe. Not one person goes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We always put it on the table. What do you think? Because, a democracy is how you stay together because girls groups can get bitchy and they fall apart. I think that's how we've made it so far. So these two, Kathy and Wendy, we have a great harmony. We have a great sound, a great blend.
And are you surprised by the success that you're meeting, or I guess you would have expected that? You had all the ingredients.
You know what? I thought I could always make it go. Even back then, we didn't have control. So I felt so stifled. I couldn't make it do that with Edna. I couldn't make it go forward.
Yep.
So this now feels like finally all the ingredients are there. Everything seems to click. I have Verdine's support, which is why we usually try to include an Earth, Wind, and Fire song in our set. Always Tina Turner. I always introduce myself as having been an Ikette, and people just go wild. She's the real deal, right? She was the real deal.
Sure. You've just recently released a new single called Here Comes the Rain Again, which some people may remember as the original from the Eurythmics in 1984. Why did you choose that song?
Well, we had a producer that kept hearing it over and over in his head. And when he called me, he said, Shelly, I got a great song for you girls. I want to give you a song, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, great. What, some cool R&B pop song? And he goes, well, it's called Here Comes the Rain Again. And I said, Wait, what? Annie Lennox? Are you sure? You're not hearing anything else, Neil? He's a seven-time, eight-time Grammy winner. And so my husband said, look, don't argue with Neil. If you hear something, you got to go with it because he proves the test of time here. So I said, you know what? Let's go with it. So, it turned out to be a nice record for us.
Well, Verdine was actually in there also, wasn't he, with
Yes,
John, the drummer for Earth, Wind and Fire?
yes. We had the husbands. That's Kathy's husband. We had Earth, Wind, and Fire rhythm section. We also have another song out there called, we did a remake of Smokey Robinson's song, Tracks of My Tears. Look that one up when you can. In this one, we had all the husbands. We had Wendy's husband, Verdine, John. We also had another guitar player.
I love the way you and Verdine work together. What a partnership. And as you said, cemented by the friendship and the commonality that you had before you actually got married. But you also helped him on his first solo project, didn't you?
Ah, yes. Motown's first songwriter, Janie Bradford, came to me. She said, I have a song. I have these lyrics, and I want your husband to do it. I said, okay, you want him to play bass? She said, no, I want him to sing lead. I said, he'll never do it, Janie. He's not a singer. He doesn't feel comfortable. She said, he'll do it. I said, he'll never do it, Janie. He's a bass player. And I said, honey, Janie wants you to sing a song. He said, I'll do it.
Shows how well you know him.
Well, make me look bad, right? And I said, Janie, he said he'll do it. So we went into the studio. It's just a great song, a great tribute to his older brother, Maurice, who, of course, started Earth, Wind, and Fire and passed away from Parkinson's disease.
Yeah. Shelly, what an amazing life you've had, and out on the road again with Honeycomb, new singles. You are blessed. You are absolutely blessed.
I know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today. Your sparkle just rubs off on anybody that you talk to, I know.
Thank you for having me. This was like girlfriends talking on the couch.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's supposed to be. I'm so pleased.
Right.
Great to chat with you.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
See you soon.
Bye-bye. Bye.